So I just wanted to dissect a little bit what for me would be the ideal trans origin story. This isn't just a story for us trans people, it's a story that we can tell everybody. I know that this is controversial. Maybe I shouldn't have come down this road after all. Hi everyone, I'd like you to meet Raven. Raven's a trans woman and I'm going to tell you a little bit about her story. So Raven was born obviously in the body of a male. She was assigned male at birth. But even as a child, she sensed that something was wrong. She would prefer to play with dolls and with her sister's friends instead of hanging out and doing all boy type activities. As she entered secondary school or high school, as it is to my American friends, she would hang out more and more with the girls, spend time with them. They would practice makeup and dressing up and all of those sorts of things. But she didn't actually know, or she didn't identify as being transgender until she went to university or college, where having that independence and access to other types of ideas and thoughts, she was finally able to put all of the pieces together in terms of her own identity. She realized that the pain and unhappiness that she'd felt when she looked at her body for years was actually dysphoria, and being able to put a word to that feeling, to that experience, and also knowing that she was not the only person was a very overwhelming experience for her. And once she'd figured this out, she started coming out to people around her. First of all, it was some friends at university who mostly supported her. But then when it came to coming out to her family, it was a lot harder. Some of her family didn't really understand and found it difficult to face up to the idea of having to call Raven by her name and her pronouns. And so she faced a lot of challenges there. However, despite all of that, she was still able to access medical support. She got hormone therapy, and so she started the transition process, both medically and socially. And eventually, over time, she also got some operations, and then her story kind of fades into just normalcy as she gets to live her life as herself for the rest of her days. Now, of course, Raven doesn't exist. She's not real. It's just a story that I made up. I wanted to create an incredibly generic trans origin story, just to kind of set the scene a little bit. Now, in this video, I'm going to be talking a bit about origin stories, especially the trans origin story, at least how I see it. But first, I just want to think a bit about why origin stories are so important. Now, I mentioned this a little bit when I was talking about religion a few weeks ago. And I said back then, in fact, I might even have been saying it in this exact same spot, funnily enough. Maybe that's why I'm reminded of it. But I said at the time that origin stories are a really useful way to spread a simple message to a large number of people. It can give you some ideas about, I don't know, not just the story itself, but about morality, about how to understand and navigate the world. And I think this is why having a good, solid trans origin story is so important, because this isn't just a story for us trans people. In fact, I'd say it's more than that. It's a story that we can tell everybody, just to give them a shorthand understanding of what it means to be us. And okay, so you probably saw or heard this story that I just told about Raven and thought, well, none of those things apply to me, or that kind of applies to me, but only slightly. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of the point. Unfortunately, with these stories, they're going to be incredibly vague, and they're not going to cover everybody's experiences. By necessity, they can't, because our experiences are unique and personal. Our journeys are our own, and it's almost impossible to capture that uniqueness within an origin story. Or maybe you can, I don't know. Anyway, so I just wanted to dissect a little bit what for me would be the ideal trans origin story. And I'd love to get your feedback on this because, this is my own personal view through my own lens. I am by no means an expert on this. And I think, if anything, this is something that we'd need to be crowdsourced. And this storytelling is going to be harder because I seem to have got a bit of a nosebleed as well. So, fun times. Okay, I think it's stopped. If you see blood starting to emerge from my nostril, then you know what's up. Basically, I've been really sick this week, and I think the constant nose blowing has ruptured a few capillaries or something. Anyway, so what I wanted to do is, as I say, I wanted to break down and come up with a kind of a generic story. And first of all, I think it's important to sort of set the groundwork. Why is this story? What are we going to use it for? So if we're going to use it for ourselves as a way to help us kind of identify who we are, then it needs to contain some semblance of reality. But also, if it's for cis people to understand us, there needs to be a certain degree of moral instruction in there as well. And I know that sounds a bit scary and a bit directive, but I mean, that's kind of the purpose of a lot of these origin stories. So, and I'm going to, as I talk through my workings and to explain why I think certain things need to be included, I'll explain why that is as well. Okay, so first of all, I think it's really difficult to come up with the specifics because the story that you tell, I mean, I'm going back to all of ancient human history here. We tell stories orally, and the stories that we've told through countless generations always change depending on the storyteller and the context. Whoever's telling this story needs to be able to adapt it so that it connects with that audience in that time. Because if you're telling this story in, say, a southern US state or in China or somewhere like that, telling the story about Andy in Poland isn't going to be as impactful or as resonance, is that a word? Whatever, as it could be if you adapt that story to your local context. So by no means is this a fixed format which people should copy like word by word. It should be, rather than fixed words, the ideas or the beats should remain, and it's those beats which are the important part. And by beats I mean the kind of the parts of the story. So to explain what I mean by that, so let's go back to my story about Raven. So what kind of beats did we cover there? So she was trans from day one. It's not something that she was made to be by other people. She wasn't influenced to become trans. She was born trans. And I think that's really important. That's something that I would say is essential in these stories, because that's something I hold as being incredibly true. And it's also a powerful idea to tell ourselves and to tell other people out in the world as well. This isn't just something that we're influenced into being, usually. Another thing that is in that story, and you see it quite a lot in these origin stories of trans people, is she tries to do things connected with her gender, as in she played with dolls and tried to play and connected better with other girls. And this is something that I would push back against a little bit. I don't know, I mean, obviously I'm not an expert. I can't speak for all trans people and their experiences, but I would say a more generic, a more likely story beat would be Raven tries her best to fit in. She tries to participate in boy activities. She takes up some boy sports. Maybe she goes to the gym to try to put on muscle. She tries to fit in with the boys, but she just can't. And that only adds to her unhappiness and her dysphoria, but she learns how to mask. And that's something of a survival strategy that she employs, and she learns that she needs to employ this from an early age. Now, I just want to pause here and just say that I'm sure that there are some out there, but most of these trans origin stories that I've heard all center on trans women or trans girls. There seems to be a dearth of trans masculine stories out there. And I mean, I don't think I'm the person that should be coming up with that particular one. I think that should be very much in the hands of my trans mask brothers. But I think that it's important that we just bear that in mind, because I think that it's something, I don't think it's something where you can just do a quick copy and paste or cut and paste job, you know, cutting out Raven and adding in Ricky, because I don't think that's fair, first of all, and I think that there are specific features about the trans mask experience that is likely very different to the trans femme experience, and I think that we need to have a story that reflects their experience as well as ours. Anyway, so let's get back to it. What other beats would I see as essential? Now let's talk a bit about acceptance. So in my story, Raven comes out to several people, friends and family, and it kind of skips over that acceptance part. It skips over any kind of issues. It talks a little bit about some people accepting her, some people not. I think, now this might be seen as a bit controversial, I think that the vast majority of people in this origin story need to accept Raven almost unconditionally, almost without any kind of pushback whatsoever. Now, I know that this is controversial, but I'll explain why that is, because people need to hear that it's okay. Not only is it okay, but it should be expected for us to have that level of acceptance. Yes, okay, there are things that people need to understand about our experience in order to fully maybe embrace who we are, but I think accepting us should be just a matter of course, something that is done almost without thinking or question. And incorporating that element into the story allows for that. Even if that might seem a little bit fantastical and unrealistic, I think cis people need to be told that's how they need to act when they hear who we are. I think that's really important, but at the same time, Raven needs to lose people, important people in her life, because as much as certain people need to hear acceptance is, it doesn't cost them anything, we can't let people off the hook that easily. We need to demonstrate that there are people out there who will reject us without any other rationale other than the fact that we're trans, and that is unacceptable. We need to frame those people in this story as especially different and especially closed-minded. Now, I know that this might seem a little bit unfair as well, or unreasonable, but if you think about what my purpose of this story is, I think that this is quite an important distinction to make, that regular people just accept us, but there are a group of people, and these people are framed as the antagonists, who do not. Yeah, as I say, I think that's a bit of a controversial take, but I'd be curious to see what you think. My word. Maybe I shouldn't have come down this road after all. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that period of her own self-acceptance as well. Because in Raven's story, it takes her time to understand who she is. And again, I think this is an important, if not essential part of this story, because I want this story to show that it can take time. It's not something that appears immediately and people are like, oh, well, that's who I am, like overnight. It is a long-term process. It takes a lot of self-discovery. And I think even though it's kind of given a bit of a shortcut in Raven's story, it seems to happen just over a couple of lines. It needs to be there within the story, whether or not we make that a long-term process or something that is explicitly made clear that it takes time. You know, I guess that's up for us to decide, but I think that time of self-discovery is important as well. One more thing that I almost forgot to include, but I think is really, really important, is that the story really should contain some examples of finding joy. There's very few mentions of the euphoric excitement of discovering yourself and the joy that transitioning and being the person that you really are can be. those things are really happy and joyful, and sometimes it feels like these trans narratives focus on just the negatives. And I think allowing some joy to be part of those stories is just as important. We should allow ourselves to feel happy, and we should allow other people to recognize that we can feel happy in ourselves as well. And then finally, she seems to disappear off into the sunset without any kind of problems. And I don't know, I mean, on the one hand, we could talk about issues with employment, housing, the risks and danger and isolation of being trans, but I think that adds too much complexity to the story. This story should be quite simple, something easy to share, easy to tell and hear for everybody involved. And I think that idea of just she gets on with her life, I think that's really beautiful. I think that's a really nice idea. Even again, if that's kind of fantastical, we need to have that as a kind of almost recognized truth in our story, that we can have mediocre and boring lives, you know? So, okay, I'm gonna leave it there because, again, I'm mindful of the time. I could talk about this for a lot more time, in fact, but I'm just gonna leave it hanging, and maybe all you wonderful folks in the comments section can add your own thoughts and ideas to it. So just to kind of summarize, I think that the story should be simple. I think it should be applicable to both trans and cis people. I think that it should contain ideas that we are who we are from birth. I think it should contain ideas of it takes a long time for us to discover who we are. Acceptance is a really essential part of that story as well. And that's my take on it. Anyway, so have a think, let me know. I know I'm going to pivot to myself giving life updates and comments of the week. See you in a bit. Okay, so for some life updates, as I think if you watched my last video, you should know that my mother came to visit me last week, and I don't know, I think I've talked about my mother before, and while I don't think I'd say that she's unsupportive, I think just to contrast my mother's trip with the conversation that I had with my dad on the Monday, I spoke with my dad and he had several questions for me about operations and stuff like that. And I welcome those questions. I thanked him for his questions, even though that I'm sure that they were very difficult for him to ask. He needed to know the answers to these things, and I was more than happy to give him the information that he needed, even if that wasn't necessarily what he expected or what he wanted to hear. So yeah, that I'd say is a difference between my mum and my dad. I don't think it's a problem. We don't have a bad relationship, but at the same time, I mean, I expected nothing less, to be honest. It was what I expected it to be. Let's put it that way. I did actually write a story which was inspired by my mother's trip. And if you would like to read that story, I will be sharing it with anybody who supports me using my Buy Me a Coffee link. You can support me for any amount that you see fit. But if you support me, I will share with you the story that I wrote based on my experience with my mother. It's not exactly realistic though, so don't expect a hard-hitting drama or anything like that. What else? I was really sick last week, as I said in my video. I'm kind of recovered, I think, by now, but yeah, I'm still suffering a little bit. I was exhausted yesterday. I was very brain foggy through the week, so I'm glad that's all over and done with. One last thing, I'm really excited because next week I'm going to be part of a screening of LGBTQ shorts here in Warsaw, and I'm so excited. I've never done anything like this before, and to be part of this, it's such an honor, and I'm really looking forward to it. So I'm very excited. I'll tell you more about it next week. As for comments of the week, well, there wasn't that much in the way of debate going on, but it's about time I celebrated one of my most regular commenters, Marty7343. You've been with me since day one basically on the channel, and every single time you write a comment or you put something underneath my channel, every time it's just so personal, and it's such an honor that you share your story with me in such a personal way. And yes, sometimes, as you say, those comments can be quite long, but I really appreciate the length and the well, I guess the amount that you write, because it just goes to show how engaged you are in in my journey, in your journey, and being willing to share it, even just in this little corner of the internet, takes a lot of bravery and courage. So thank you so much, Marty. Your ongoing comments and support means so much to me. It's really wonderful that you enjoy my videos, I assume, as much as you do. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. So thank you very much, everybody. I hope that you've had a wonderful week and you've got a great week ahead of you. We'll see what next week brings. Hopefully I'll be feeling 100% through the whole week, and I'll let you know about my exciting cinema adventure from Wednesday. Take care, all the best, and I'll see you all very soon. Goodbye.